Little backstory. Tim actually ticked me off about 2 weeks ago. I figured, yep, I'm going to make him read every single name. That's not true. I love Tim. But he did call me like 3 times. Are you sure? You sure? I'm like, yep, I am. My name's Chuck. I get the privilege of serving our church this morning, and it really is an honor and a privilege to be up here this morning. And I'm sure you guys, before we get into this, I'm sure there's a question that is in at least half this room is probably asking is, why? Why are we looking at a list of names? What can possibly be said for 25, 30, 35 minutes about a bunch of names that are hard to pronounce? And usually, we run across these lists in the Old Testament as well, and usually lists like this, they're the ones that we kind of say, when we're doing our yearly Bible reading, we're I'm just going to skip these for now and maybe come back to it. And then we never really, we always find something else to do or something else to read or whatever. But we preach through the Bible for a reason. So around the Citylight family, we preach through the Bible. Sometimes it's verse for verse. Sometimes it's chapter for chapter. But we preach through large sections of Scripture. And we happen to be going through the book of Luke right now. And the reason we do that is we don't get to treat God's Word like a buffet. Yeah. We don't just get to pick out the highlights, the part that feels exciting. We don't skip over the vegetables and just go to dessert, right? We want to make sure that we look at each and every part of the Bible, because even the genealogies, especially the genealogies, they are loaded with the truth of the gospel. And around here we define the gospel as the fact that God saves sinners through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That's the gospel, and even the genealogies are filled with the gospel. So what I want to do today, I kind of want to, I got this sermon in one sentence that I want to share with everyone today, because it's going to be something that we're going to keep coming back to over and over. So if you were to package these almost 2,700 words that are on this manuscript into one sentence, it would be this: Jesus stepped into humanity to give us a new identity. All right? Jesus stepped into humanity to give us a new identity. I want you to say it with me, okay? Because I want you to go fall asleep on me. It should be up on the screen. Say it with me. Jesus to give us a new identity. All right, I think that's what Luke's point is this morning as we look at this genealogy. All right? That's the good news of this passage. And if you catch that, I think we'll look at genealogies different as we move forward. We'll actually kind of see them a little bit differently. So Luke 3:23 starts with those words. Now Jesus himself began his ministry at about 30 years of age. And then as we see, Luke drops a whole family tree, and it ends with these words: the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. Now I'll admit, I cherry-picked the easy ones, didn't I? But that's the landing point that Luke comes to. The son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God. That's the mic drop. That's Luke saying, don't miss what I'm doing here. That's kind of how he ends that. And I think the reality is this morning, we all come in here from different places, don't we? So we all come in here from, maybe we have some bills from the holidays that have piled up, and we're like, I don't even know how I'm going to pay those. I'm not sure what it's going to be like. The finances aren't really quite what they need to be. Maybe you come in this morning and you're a little bit depressed. Maybe there's some family baggage that you're still reeling from. Maybe there's doubts that you have about your purpose. Maybe you're dealing with some type of grief. Maybe you have some regret. Maybe you're worried about those things that you've been dreaming for a long time, but they haven't quite yet come true like you hoped. I think even in this midst of these genealogies, that Luke has got something for us. So up to this point, Luke has been telling an incredible story, right? We've been walking through it verse by verse. He starts with the birth of Jesus. Actually, he starts with the birth of John, but he gets to the birth of Jesus. You have the shepherds, the angels, then you have the story of John the Baptist. He continues with Jesus getting baptized, the heavens open, the Spirit descends, and then we hear those wonderful, magnificent words from the Father that this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. Pretty awesome, right? Pretty awesome. And then, right after this genealogy, Jesus walks into the wilderness and goes head to head, toe to toe, whatever you want to call it, with Satan. So why does Luke put the genealogy right here? I think it's because Luke is doing something strategic. He's saying before you watch Jesus fight the devil, before you see Jesus do all the things that Jesus did, preach and teach and suffer and do miracles and heal people, we need to know who Jesus is. Because here's the thing. Nobody shows up without someone actually asking, where'd this guy come from? All right? It's human nature. We do it all the time. We don't necessarily ask about someone's genealogy. But when you meet someone new, you're like, hey, where are you from? Oh, I live on the west end of Council Bluffs. Where are you from? Well, I grew up in Dayton. That last name, that's a little bit different. Yeah, usually most of us who spell our last name like this, we're kind of related. If you meet somebody and you happen to recognize their name, maybe it's a little bit unusual. Hey, are you in relation to so-and-so? We want to know where people come from. It's our human nature. We do it all the time. So whether it's a coworker or a neighbor or just someone that you cross paths with at an event, sooner or later the question usually comes out like, what's your story? Where are you from? And the reason we ask those types of questions is because knowing where someone comes from helps us understand who they are. It helps us make a connection. It builds trust. It validates them. It helps us understand their story and what shaped them. So I think Luke's answering questions that he knows we would ask because deep down these things mean something to us because we're wired to care about stuff like that. You guys tracking with me? So this really kind of hit home for me a couple of years ago when I found out something that I had suspected for years. Now, I didn't grow up in like a traditional home with, mom and dad or whatever. My mom divorced the guy that I thought was my biological dad. His name was Chuck Miller because he was abusive and he was an alcoholic. And later, she remarried a guy named Bob Kizer. Probably 2 or 3 years later, she married Bob Kizer. And eventually, he adopted me and my little sister. So I grew up with a dad in my home who loved me and gave me his name. He provided well for me. And I'm super grateful for that, right? But even with that gratitude, there was still this quiet confusion that followed me around. Because I didn't quite look like my siblings. So you guys see who I am. If I were to describe my siblings, I would use words like tall. I'd use words like dark, right? Dark, kind of like darker tone of skin, black hair. And then there's me, shorter, blonde, fair skin. And as a kid, I'm not doing DNA charts or anything like that, but I've got questions. Because I just don't look the same. Like the family pictures, you have all of them, 6'4", 6'4", 6 foot, 5'11". And then you got me. So it was just a tad bit different. I happened to always be the odd one out. So I did what a lot of us would do. I started looking at the family tree, trying to find out a little bit more about who Chuck Miller was. And really, honestly, nothing really fit. Like the pictures that I was able to get my hands a hold of, there was nothing. His sisters, his nephews, those types of relationships, there's just nothing, nobody that even looked a prayer like I looked. So then I looked at my mom's side, and there was initially the same problem. I really didn't have any of the features. I don't have any of the features that, like my grandma or my uncles. I mean, they're shorter like me, but they're like either dark-headed or they're red-headed. So there just wasn't really that connection. And then somewhere in all of that, I mean, I love these people, but I didn't look like these people. And somewhere in all of that, my grandma, who was my mom's mom, told me a story. I started asking her questions about who Chuck Miller was. And she said, well, what are you asking questions like that for? I said, I just kind of want to know. I'm trying to find out, where I come from and all that kind of stuff. And she said, well, you know that Chuck Miller is really not your biological dad. I'm like, what? Now, my grandma had a little bit of a history of stirring the pot, right? She would make up stories just to keep everyone on their toes. So when I asked my mom about grandma's story, she said, grandma, you know what grandma's like, right? Now, that's not true. That's grandma just talking. So I filed that away, not confirmed, not denied, just like a big question mark, right? So fast forward a couple of decades, and our daughter bought Jen and I one of those DNA kits. And I'm back in Ohio and on vacation when I get a notification that changed everything. And the way those DNA kits work is you sign up and, you put like your surname and all these different types of things. And if anybody that's connected with you by DNA, it'll like pop up a certain notification. And so, like for instance, our daughter, when she shows up, she's like 49% or something. Pretty high. I know she's my daughter, right? Now, there, as you separate from myself, that percentage gets significantly less. But if there is a percentage of somewhere between like 2 to 6% of connection of DNA match, that's pretty significant. Like that's a big deal. And so I'm sitting there at my mom and dad's house. Mom's right here, and I'm sitting on the couch, and this notification pops up, and it shows someone who is matched to me by like 6%. That's pretty high. That's like I think it's like a cousin, maybe a second cousin. It's significant. And I happened to look through her surnames, and lo and behold, one of the surnames that she listed was McMahon. So this wasn't like, oh, wow, that's interesting type of moment. No, this was one of those moments where you realize you're not just learning information, I'm beginning to learn a little bit about identity. So I reached out to my mom and I told her what I found, and she finally came clean and she told me the entire story. And I really want to be careful because I think my mom sometimes listens to these messages. I love my mom. I love my mom. And in that phone conversation, she told me that she kept information from me because she was ashamed. She carried that weight for years. And as you can imagine, at this point, there were all kinds of things going through my mind, right? But I remember two things that stood out distinctly. There was a relief and there was regret. I felt relief because I knew at that moment Chuck Miller wasn't my dad. And that meant his story didn't have to be my story. The fear I carried that the worst parts of his life were somehow stamped into me, God lifted that from me. He took that weight off my shoulders. It was like the Lord was reminding me, you are not doomed to repeat a story that you didn't choose. But right next to that relief was regret, because I realized that there was a whole side of the family, this McMahon side, people I never knew, relationships I didn't get to build, time that I cannot rewind. And that regret wasn't petty. It was real grief, grief over distance, grief over lost years. I felt like I was severed from one family tree and connected to another. I went from wondering where I fit to realizing I fit somewhere that I didn't even know existed. I wasn't just learning information, I was learning who I belonged to. And here's why I share that. That search, that confusion, that ache to know where you come from and where you belong, that is deeply human. It's deeply human. And as Luke is sharing this genealogy, he knows, God knows as he's inspiring Luke to write this stuff down, there's going to be skeptics. There's going to be doubters. There's going to be seekers. There's going to be people who want to verify that Jesus is actually real. That Jesus actually came from a real place, that he had a real family, that there was a real line. Because in that culture, genealogy was everything. It was a huge deal. And so Luke is writing this down to show us who Jesus was. Now, let me make it clear. Jesus never doubted who he was. Jesus knew exactly who he was. He never had that confusion. Jesus never wondered who he was. He never questioned where he belonged. Luke gives us this genealogy not because Jesus needed clarity, but because we need that clarity. You tracking with me, right? Jesus didn't step into humanity searching for identity. He stepped into humanity to secure in his identity as the Son of God people like us. He secured our identity who spend our lives trying to figure ourselves out. He let us know that we can find our identity in him. Guys, Jesus stepped into humanity to give us a new identity. You guys tracking with me? Isn't that a beautiful thing? Jesus stepped into humanity to give us a new identity. So when we look at these names, as hard as they were for Tim to read, when we look at these names through that set of lenses, they hit a little bit differently. We stop reading it like a phone book and we start looking at it like a family album. And every name is a reminder that Jesus didn't come for an imaginary world. He came for the one that we are actually a part of. Now, I want to take a moment to point out something that you might never notice unless you sit down and you really look at it. The Bible, and you may hear this from time to time as you look at the genealogies, but the Bible actually gives us two genealogies of Jesus. And if you were to sit down this week and read Matthew chapter 1 and Luke 3 side by side, you're going to notice something that actually stands out pretty quickly. Not because you're a Bible scholar, but because you're actually just kind of paying attention. The names in each list, Matthew 1 and Luke chapter 3, are actually different. Okay? And there's a good reason for that. Matthew starts out his genealogy with Abraham and moves forward. That's how it reads. Luke, as we have found out, starts with Jesus and works his way backward. Matthew stops at Abraham, but Luke keeps going past Abraham all the way back to Adam. That's not accidental. When you study the Bible, it's important that you know who the original audience is. We call that context, right? Matthew was writing to a mainly Jewish context. So he anchors Jesus into Israel's story. Israel was looking for the Messiah. He's showing us that, he's showing us that Jesus is the promised king. He's showing us that Jesus is the Messiah that we've been looking for. So Luke, though, he's writing to a broader, mostly Gentile audience, so he takes the story further back. Luke is saying Jesus didn't just step into Israel's history, Jesus stepped into human history. So Matthew helps us see who Jesus is for Israel. Luke helps us see who Jesus is for all of us. Two genealogies, nothing to be upset about or those types of things. It's the same Jesus, different angles of the same truth. Luke takes us all the way back to Adam on purpose because Luke wants every person in the room to hear this, that Jesus stepped into humanity to give us a new identity. That means that this genealogy isn't there to impress you. It's there to include you. And if that's true, if Jesus stepped into humanity to give us a new identity, then we can't treat these names like some background noise. These names actually matter. But that doesn't mean that we have to analyze every single one of them to hear what Luke is saying. So instead of covering the whole list, I want us to slow down and focus on just a few key names. We're going to look at this genealogy the same way you might scan a family tree and try to pick out some of the highlights that are there to try to understand yourself. Not reading every name, but noticing the anchors, the patterns, the stories that stand out. And so when you read these names, you'll see names like Adam, it's right at the end, Abraham, David, and Noah, I think was in there as well. And at first glance, you see those names and you think, oh man, those are the heroes, right? Those are the Hall of Famers. Those are the guys who had faith. Those are the guys who did big things. But when you actually learn the stories of Adam and Noah and Abraham and David, you find out that that's not the whole picture, right? There's some issues that these guys had. Adam rebelled against God, hence brokenness, right? Noah was a drunk. Abraham was a coward and offered his wife up to sleep with another man. Yeah, put that in the family line, right? David committed adultery and murder. So what does this family line teach us? It teaches us that behind every name, there's a story. But behind most stories is some level of brokenness. And, you got to love that about the Bible. I love how the Bible doesn't leave the messy parts out. Like people who talk about that this is just some made-up story and that it's not really all that true, that we're following this delusional type of concept that Jesus isn't really who he says he is. I don't even know if they ever read the Bible. Because if I'm going to build a story, if I'm going to bring up whatever, I'm not going to put the messy parts in there. The Bible includes all of the messy parts. It includes all the levels of brokenness. It doesn't airbrush the family photo. It just tells the truth. It tells the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And here's why this is good news, Citylight. If you walked in here this morning with a complicated story, if you walked in here with a bunch of baggage, if you walked in here knowing at home there's a bunch of bills, if you walked in here with any level of shame or regret, maybe you've learned to manage it a little bit, maybe you've learned to hide it, maybe you've even learned to rename it, I want to let you know that this passage doesn't flinch. It's actually a flex. This passage shows us the beauty of the gospel, that Jesus didn't come to humanity like a tourist. He didn't just come to see what was beautiful. He came for what was ugly. He came for what was broken. He came into a line of humanity that was full of fractures and failures. He came into a line of humanity that was full of regrets and relapses. He came into a line of people who were completely incapable of saving themselves. Read those names. Check out those names in the Old Testament. Those were some messed up people. I just picked out 4. He came into that line. And Citylight, if Jesus stepped into that kind of family, he can step into ours. If Jesus can change that family tree, he can change my family tree. He didn't just step into their stories. He didn't just step into their stories. He stepped into ours. He didn't just step into their mess. He stepped into our mess. And he didn't just step into their past. He stepped into the parts of our story that we try not to think about, the ones that we don't talk about at parties, the ones we try to cover up and make excuses for. He stepped in to our story. Because Citylight, brokenness just doesn't live in a family tree. It lives in our very identity. It follows us. It names us. It labels us. And I think, again, if we were being completely honest here this morning, some of us walked in here today wearing labels that we didn't choose. We carried them so long that it feels like they become our names. Labels like divorced, addict, angry, abandoned, not enough. Maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm unwanted. Maybe I'm unclean. Failure. And we try to outrun those labels, don't we? We try to outrun those labels by attaining some level of success. Maybe we think that's going to make us feel better. Or maybe we protect our reputation somehow by not being honest or transparent. Maybe we work harder, spend more time at the office. Or maybe we spend most of our time trying to control others, trying to get in front of all the mess. But Luke is showing us that we don't have to be trapped by what humanity handed us. Jesus stepped into humanity to give us a new identity. So here's where all this comes together. If Jesus stepped into humanity to give us a new identity, then the question isn't whether we have an identity. It's which one are you living out of? Some of us walked in here today wearing labels that were handed to us by other people. And honestly, maybe some of us are wearing labels that we've earned. Some of us are carrying labels we never chose, but we have learned to live with. And the truth is, humanity is really good at labeling us, right? But they're terrible at saving us. Humanity will tell us you're based on your worst moment. Humanity will reduce us to our failure. Humanity will define us by what is broken, by what ended, by what you lost or what you did. But Luke, he wants us to see something deeper. Jesus didn't just step into humanity to observe it. He stepped into humanity to redeem it. He stepped into broken stories so broken stories could be rewritten. He stepped into fractured identities so new identities could be formed. And here's another thing. Jesus stepped into our humanity knowing exactly where it would lead him. And that's why this genealogy ends at Adam. Adam failed. Humanity fractured. Sin entered the story. Death followed, and Jesus stepped into that story knowing that the only way to give us a new identity was to take the old one on himself. I think 2 Corinthians 5:21 said that he who knew no sin became sin for us so that we might experience the righteousness of God. We sing that song, The Great Exchange. That's what that's all about. He who knew no sin took our sin and gave us his righteousness. That's the cross. At the cross, Jesus didn't just carry the nails. He carried those names. Mattathias, Elias, Peleg. All those names that we don't want to pronounce. Zerubbabel. He carried those names to the cross. And you know what, Citylight? He carried your name. He carried your name to the cross. He carried my name to the cross. And every name mentioned in this genealogy, he carried every label that humanity could ever place on us. He carried our shame, our sin, our broken identity. And when he rose from the grave, he didn't just defeat death. He redefined who gets to belong. Which means if you're in Christ today, your truest identity is no longer divorced. It's no longer addict. It's no longer failure or unwanted or not enough or too much. Your truest identity is forgiven, restored, adopted, redeemed, made new. Citylight, this is why we are here. This is the beauty of the gospel. This is why every verse matters. And this is why we take communion. Communion isn't something you earn. It's something you receive. It's a reminder that your new identity didn't come and doesn't come from effort. You're not defined by your worst mistake. Your identity comes from his sacrifice. When we take the bread, we remember that his body is broken. Not for perfect people, but for humanity in its mess. We take the cup and we remember his blood is poured out not to shame us, but to cleanse us. Communion is the moment where we stop trying to prove who we are and remember who Jesus says we are. So today, as you come forward, I want you to come forward a little bit differently. Man, you don't have to pretend anything. Come broken. Come knowing that Jesus gave his life for you. Don't worry about the polish. Don't worry about the bling. Don't come carrying the labels that society or humanity has placed on you. We were never meant to carry those anyway. Come remembering this truth, that Jesus stepped into this humanity so that he can give us a new identity.